Welcome back to the Nintendo Wiretap. My name is Amiibo Jason, and on today's episode, we have a wide variety of stories to cover, ranging from censorship to Pokemon Sword and Shield, and even the Virtual Boy coming to Luigi's Mansion 3. So, without further ado, let's take a look. Alright folks, it's going to be a busy day of Nintendo news. I'm not sure where to start on this one, so let's just start with my favorite story of the day. And that is the Virtual Boy making its appearance in Luigi's Mansion 3. Now you might know this about me, you might not. I'm a massive fan of the Virtual Boy. Yes, I know it's not the greatest system in the world, it sold like absolute crap, and Nintendo really didn't support it for all that long. In fact, there's only a handful of games on the console, but still, it was awesome. It was innovative. It gave me headaches. Yes, I'll admit that, but it was still a really cool piece of tech. So imagine my surprise when I saw that we're getting a device called the Virtual Boo in Luigi's Mansion 3. So if you've played any of the Luigi's Mansion games before, you know that Nintendo typically has a handheld game system that Luigi talks to Dr. Egad. In the first one, we had something called the Game Boy Horror. Get it? Game Boy Horror? Game Boy Color? I know it's a bit of a stretch. And in the second game, we had something called the Dual Screen instead of the Dual Screen, the Nintendo DS. No? I think it's kind of cute, but like I said before, in this installment we are getting a Virtual Boy called the Virtual Boo, and we get our very first look at it thanks to the good folks over at GameXplain. Now if you want to see that entire video, we have a link to that in the description down below if you want to check it out. Now lucky for all of us, we have very little time to wait for Luigi's Mansion 3. It's coming out on October 31st, 2019. That's right, just in time for Halloween. Are you picking this game up? Are you excited? Are you kind of geeking out about the Virtual Boo? Let me know your thoughts about this story in the comments down below. Alright, next up tonight, I want to talk about something I'm really excited about. I'm a massive retro gamer, I love handheld gaming, and there is a new device coming out next year that is promising to be one of the best handheld gaming devices ever. Now this device is called the Analogue Pocket, which is coming out in 2020 for a very steep $199, or the price of a Switch Lite. Now, this plans to play the original Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games all on its high-definition display. And it's also going to have an internal battery that can be recharged via USB Type-C, stereo speakers, and remappable buttons. But it's not just limited to Game Boy games either. Analogue plans to release adapters for Sega's Game Gear, the SNK Neo Geo Pocket Color, and even the Atari Lynx. A dock will also be released, letting you plug it and play it on the big screen. Sound familiar? Just a bit. Now, I know this one's going to be a bit polarizing, especially because, well, there's a lot of devices out there that can emulate a lot of games. I mean, a hacked 3DS, PSP, PS Vita, I mean, pretty much anything can play most of these games at this point, but for people like me, and for hardcore game collectors, there's something magical about playing on your original Game Boy cartridge. So, here's the deal. When I first heard about this thing, I kind of assumed that yes, it's a neat little device, but more than likely what it would do would take the cart, dump the ROM, and it would emulate the game, but according to the official Analogue website, that's not the case. They're claiming that this is completely emulation-free, so they've engineered something that can play all of these things essentially natively without any kind of emulation whatsoever, which makes me want this thing even more. So, I mean, at this point, I'm guessing the price tag on this is going to turn a lot of gamers off. $200 is a lot, especially for a gaming console when the Nintendo Switch Lite is the exact same price. But for people like me that have a absolutely massive catalog of Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and Game Boy Color games, this is going to be a godsend. And I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to collect Game Gear, so all we really need at this point is an adapter to play Virtual Boy games, and this would be the perfect system. Come on, Analogue, make this one happen. But let me know your thoughts on this one. What do you think about this device? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you think the price tag is way too high? Let me know your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Alright, we have two stories left to cover tonight. This next one is going to be a bit controversial, I'm sure, depending on what side of this argument you're on, but it looks like the updated version of Tokyo Mirage Sessions coming to the Nintendo Switch is going to be the censored US release, not just here, but in Japan as well. Now, back in 2016, when Tokyo Mirage Sessions came out in the US, it came with a bunch of notable changes. Specifically, costumes. The costumes in the game were toned down drastically. In fact, there was an entire DLC that just never made its way to the US because it was considered too racy, and one entire section of the game went from being a swimsuit section to a streetwear section, which I'm sure a lot of people just didn't like. Now, some of the censorship in the game was kind of odd because it was censored in some things like cutscenes, but in the game itself, areas weren't censored, so it was kind of picking and choosing what to show and what not to show. But now, like I mentioned before, the enhanced port is coming out on the Nintendo Switch, and it looks like the version that's coming out is going to be the Western release of the game, both in the US and in Japan. Now, it's not just all the costumes, too. Some of the characters' ages were moved from 17 to 18, so they'd be more like consenting adults and not children on the screen, which, to be honest, I think that's probably a good idea, Nintendo. I'm happy you did that. But still, a lot of people don't like censorship in any way, shape, or form, and now that the Western release might be coming out in Japan, there's going to be a whole new wave of controversy on this one, so I'm really curious to see your thoughts on this one. I think it's going to be kind of a polarizing topic. Personally, I'm not a major fan of censorship, but it's got to be tough for Nintendo, at least on some level. They want to make sure that one market is going to have a similar experience to another market, but at the same time, they're trying to gear things towards that respected area, so I don't blame them for trying to change specific things, but sometimes maybe they do go too far. But I'm really curious to see your thoughts on this one. Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, and finally tonight, we're getting a brand new Arcade Archives Castlevania coming to the Nintendo Switch today. Now, if you're familiar, developer Hamster has had this series called the Arcade Archives, and it's really neat. There's a lot of amazing games on there that originally started off in the arcade that are released on this system. And you might not know this, but there's actually a Castlevania game that was much harder that was released in arcades, and starting today, we're getting that game on the eShop. Now, the game was modeled very heavily after the NES version of Castlevania, but the difficulty is ramped up to account for the original arcade settings, so with tougher enemies and shorter time limits. So if you're a fan of Castlevania, or just a fan of just incredibly difficult games, I recommend you pick this one up. It's available right now in the eShop for $8. Alright folks, that's going to wrap up tonight's Nintendo Wiretap. I'll see you soon with yet another episode, but as always until then, stay wired in. Bye guys.